Hello everyone, my name is Meredith Jaffe and I'm the Festival Director for StoryFest. Welcome to this very special virtual Mother's Day event where we will be chatting with international best-selling author Natasha Lester. Before I introduce our guest, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say that even though we are in a virtual format, we would love everyone to stay social. So feel free to post on your favourite platforms. The hashtag is StoryFestVirtual. At the end of this session, there will be some questions from the audience, which you've kindly sent in earlier. You'll also see a link to Harbour Bookshop so that you can go and order any of Natasha's books from them and support a local bookstore in a time of difficulty or crisis. There will also be an opportunity for you to show your support for StoryFest. There will be a link through to our website to the contribution page, and if you feel so inclined, you can nominate an amount that you would like to contribute towards the StoryFest account so that we can hold other events like this in the future. Now, Natasha and I are frocked up, bubbles at the ready. Let me introduce our guest. Before becoming a writer, Natasha Lester worked for L'Oréal Paris, managing the Maybelline account. She returned to university to study a Masters of Creative Writing at Curtin, and then through that process then produced her first novel, which went on to win the TAG Hungerford Award for Fiction. Her first historical novel, A Kiss for Mr. Fitzgerald, was published in 2016, followed by Her Mother's Secret in the following year. In 2018, The Paris Seamstress became an Australian and international best-selling novel, and quickly followed with that success was The French Photographer. So Natasha now gets to say that she is a New York Times best-selling author, and let me tell you, as one writer to another, that is music to a writer's ears. Today we're here to talk about Natasha's new book, The Paris Secret. I'm really grateful that we can say hello, welcome Natasha.
Thank you so much for having me, Meredith, and hi to everyone who's joining us.
Yeah, happy Mother's Day too.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe it. It's May. It feels like I can't keep track of this year. It's just crazy.
It's a blur. It's a blur.
Yeah.
You said somewhere that one of the things that you find with the writing of your novels is that the research for one novel ends up providing the inspiration or the inciting moment for the next novel. So I was curious, what was that moment with The Paris Secret?
There were two moments, in fact, and the first of those was there's a book that's actually provided the inspiration for a couple of my novels, and it's called Les Parisiennes, and it's a book by a woman called Anne Seber, who's an amazing historical writer, and that book is about the wartime experiences of Parisian women who collaborated with the Nazis during the Second World War and women who actively worked against the Nazis in the Second World War. And one woman she mentions very briefly in that book is Catherine Dior, Christian Dior's sister. And I had never heard of Catherine until I saw this very brief mention in Anne Seber's book, which was that Catherine worked with the French resistance during the Second World War and was captured by the Nazis and deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. And as soon as I read that, I thought, oh gosh, I had no idea that Christian, who everyone knows is this amazing couturier and who's so famous, had this sister who was so brave and so courageous and suffered so terribly during the war. And shouldn't we know a little bit more about her? So that was the first seed of the idea that I wanted to write a book with Catherine as a character to hopefully help bring her back to people's notice. And the second spark came from a different book that I was reading as research for The French Photographer. And in that book, it mentioned an organisation called the Air Transport Auxiliary. And it said that a group of women worked with the Air Transport Auxiliary during the Second World War, ferrying RAF planes to RAF bases throughout England in atrocious conditions. And I thought, wow, I never knew that women worked as pilots during the Second World War. I want to find out more about them. So it was that group of women and that one particular woman that brought me to sit down and write The Paris Secret.
I know that you like to do research trips when you research your books. You've been to Paris a number of times. For the Paris Secret, obviously Paris would have been a part of that. Did you also go to places like Ravensbrück, the concentration camp, or where it had once been?
I didn't go to Ravensbrück. There was a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, there's very little left there from the time during the Second World War, because once Germany was kind of carved up into East Germany and West Germany, Ravensbrück, what was Ravensbrück, was in East Germany. So it was impossible to get to Ravensbrück. There wasn't the impetus to preserve that as a place that should be kind of sacred for future generations, I guess, once it was under communist rule. So there is still a small kind of museum memorial there, but in terms of the kind of information that I needed to write this book, I quickly discovered from doing a bit of research that going to Ravensbrück wasn't necessarily going to provide me with that, which was, I guess, a shame that, you know, it was kind of trapped in East Germany and therefore didn't kind of, wasn't able to be preserved and protected in maybe the same way that Dachau and Auschwitz were, which I have been to. So my research for this book was really through France and through England, because those were two of the key locations that the Paris Secret is set in.
And what was the best part? What was the most fun part of researching the novel?
Oh, there was a few fun parts, actually.
I think I might be able to guess one or two of them.
Yeah, okay, so the dresses that were fun. So at the start of the Paris Secret, the Cat, who's the protagonist in the contemporary storyline of the book, discovers this wardrobe of 65 haute couture Christian Dior gowns hiding in her grandmother's abandoned cottage in Cornwall. And so I wanted to actually hand select, if you like, those 65 Dior haute couture gowns. And so to do that, I, in the interest of research, went to several Christian Dior exhibitions in different museums around the world. I was pretty lucky. 2017 was like the year of Dior in terms of museum exhibitions, and that was the year I was researching the book. So the universe was definitely on my side when it came to writing this book. So there was the NGV in Melbourne had an amazing exhibition about Dior, and then the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris had an exhibition called Couturier de Rêve, which was also a beautiful exhibition about Dior. And then I went up to Granville, which is a little town in northern France, in Normandy, where the Dior family used to live. In fact, it's the ex-Dior family home, and that's now been turned into a museum dedicated to the Diors, mainly to Christian, obviously, and they have an amazing collection of gowns there too. So amongst those gowns, plus at the V&A in London, I was able to kind of, you know, pick out the gowns that kind of feature in the Paris Secret. So that was lots of fun. There was another quite fun part of the research, which I don't think I've really talked too much about, because part of the book is set in Cornwall in England. In fact, the book opens in Cornwall when the main character Skye is quite a young child. I wanted to find the right Cornish town. I had an image in my mind of where Skye would live, but I wanted to go and actually find that place because it's so important in the storyline, that her childhood home. So I took the family, we drove around Cornwall, went to all the big kind of famous towns, I guess, like St Ives and Penzance, and they were just too big and not right. And then we pulled into all the tiny little towns as well. And there was this one little town called Porthleven, which I'd never heard of. And essentially parked the car and got out and saw this kind of very desolate pier stretching out into the sea. I thought, oh, that's kind of, yes, exactly. It's not really beautiful, but it's kind of desolation has its own beauty. And then I saw, as I looked kind of down the coast, this cliff top, which had a couple of houses kind of perched up on top of it. And so we drove out there to have a look because that was exactly how I'd imagined this guy's house might be. And then I spent the next half an hour traipsing around these two houses on the cliff top, taking photos and looking at them from all angles. And so I dread to think of what the person who actually lives in that house must have thought of me traipsing around the cliff top, taking photos of their house. But it was all in the interest of book research, and it was the perfect location. So I just had to do it. So that was quite fun too. My kids thought that was fun. They were like, is anyone going to come out and tell us off, Mummy? And I'm like, no, we'll be fine. I'll just have an author.
The other thing I noticed that I really liked about The Power Secret was you have a dual timeline / dual narrative. What is it about that structure that really works for you in terms of servicing the story?
I think because for me, there's a couple of reasons for that. I think that war has a very long-term effect on the people who endure it, and that effect actually passes down through generations, sometimes in ways that people aren't aware of until perhaps later their mother or grandparent has died and they come across papers and souvenirs and realise that it was a very formative part of that person's life. And I have lots of readers, in fact, get in touch with me and tell me about their mother or their grandparent who, you know, wasn't perhaps very communicative about the war in their lifetime, but that they wished that they had heard more about that because they had subsequently found out things about that person that were very intriguing and very interesting and kind of explained a lot about who that person became after the war. So I'm kind of interested in the effect of that legacy through the generations. And also, I guess, in line with that, because the First and Second World War and that period of time between the wars was such a massive time of change for women, I'm really interested to kind of compare, I guess, and contrast the way in which women were treated then and the kinds of things they fought for and had to fight against compared to what women face today, and looking at the ways in which some of those things have changed for the better and some of those things we've still got a long way to go. So I quite like the way the dual narrative allows me to play around with those kinds of things. And also, I guess, narratively, it's it lends itself to being able to string out a mystery for that little bit longer. I do have to say, though, I think there's only so many books you can write with that sort of structure. And so I've got one coming out next year that has a similar structure, but the one that I've planned for the year after doesn't. It's got a different structure because I think you get to the point where you run out of ways to connect those two storylines. You don't want to just write the same thing over and over again. So I think it's a great framework, but it needs a rest or refresh every now and again.
Fair enough. Well, going to the wartime narrative, I mean, this is primarily told from the perspective of, or through the eyes of Skye Penrose, and she is your pilot. You were just talking about the women pilots before. And female pilots are a rich vein of material for fiction and non-fiction and movies, etc. What is it that you wanted to say about this particular group of women, these female pilots in World War I? Sorry.
They were incredible women. When I first started researching them, it was immediately obvious to me that the way in which they had to fight to be able to do their jobs was quite extraordinary, and that they withstood the discrimination and the prejudice, which made them incredibly courageous, I guess. And so that, I like to write about women doing something quite unusual for their time in history, and this certainly was unusual, and having to fight against so many barriers, and this was a clear example of that. It's difficult for us to imagine, I guess, because flying is not so unusual these days, but back in the 1940s, for a woman to fly a plane was outrageous. Women didn't even drive cars largely at that time, so to get behind get in the driving seat of a plane was really, really unusual. And the RAF was sort of, obviously a very male-dominated establishment, and these women were flying the RAF's planes, and the RAF were very reluctant to allow women to do that for no other reason than simple prejudice. And the way in which these women had to fly these planes was quite extraordinary. They were basically given a compass and a plane, and told to fly from one RAF base to the next in this plane, relying on their compass to get them there, and looking down out of the plane at the old Roman roads in England and the railroads to guide them from one base to the next. They didn't have any navigation aids. They had a map. They had no radio to kind of call in and check where they were. So they were kind of, can you imagine a pilot these days getting into a plane and being given a compass and told, use the compass and the railway tracks to get yourself from Perth to Adelaide? it's impossible to imagine that would happen, but yet that's what these women did every day throughout the entire war. And problematically, obviously, they were told to fly underneath the cloud, because if the cloud was between them and the land, then they couldn't see those railroads, which were kind of their direction markers. But it's England. Fly below the cloud. There's kind of cloud everywhere a lot of the time, and it's you might start flying and there's no cloud, and then clouds kind of descend, and the women were often trapped in cloud and died because they couldn't see where they were going. They flew into hills, they flew out of England and over the sea and ran out of fuel and crash landed in the sea. They got shot at by the Luftwaffe. It was this really dangerous job. And they handled it so well. They had so many less accidents than the men. They had a much safer flying record. They flew every single kind of plane they possibly could get their hands on. And they did it day in, day out for years. And yet so few people know about them. And I thought, God, we need to know about these women. And particularly in those very early couple of years, 1939, 1940, 1941, there was so much backlash against them. People writing in letters to the editor, calling the women disgusting, saying they didn't have the intelligence to scrub the floor properly, let alone fly a plane. And I was just outraged that if you really looked at the kinds of conditions they were flying those planes in and their safety records, they clearly had a lot of intelligence and a lot of courage. And how dare these people say that kind of thing about them? So it was an organisation that clearly there was so much drama in there, and drama's perfect for fiction, and also these were women whose stories deserve to be told. So I wanted to tell them.
Brilliant, yes, it was great. And I have to correct myself a moment ago, because Skye learned to fly her mother flew in World War I and she flew in World War II. So sorry everyone that I got my wars muddled up. The other main character, I know. The other main character, of course. So we come back now to our wardrobe full of Dior dresses. It's a wonderful, well, it's not just dresses, outfits, I should say. It's a wonderful moment in the narrative. So can you lead us into that and also introduce us to our other main protagonist, which is Kat Jourdan?
Sure. So Kat is a fashion conservator who lives in Sydney, and Kat goes to London for a conference. She speaks on fashion conservation at conferences relatively regularly. And while she's in London, her grandmother calls her and tells her that she has a cottage in Cornwall that Kat has never heard about. And the caretaker has been unwell for a few months, and she'd like Kat to go down to Cornwall and check on the house. And so Kat gets into a car, drives down to Cornwall, not really knowing what she's going to find at the end, has no idea what this cottage is going to look like, and stumbles upon this abandoned, decrepit-looking cottage stuck out all by itself on this very deserted cliff top. And so she kind of approaches the house with a little bit of trepidation, opens the front door, starts to look through all the rooms as her grandmother has asked her to, and sees in every room that there are still all of the objects of some people that must have once lived there, perhaps in the late 1920s or early 1930s, judging by the date of the pieces there. There's brush and mirror sets on dressing tables, there's sheet music on the piano, etc. And she thinks this is all a bit strange, and then she finally makes her way to the very last bedroom upstairs, and she opens the wardrobe and she sees all of this extraordinary colour and fabric and silk and organza, and pulls down one of these fabulous creations off the hanger, has a look at the label and sees it's a Christian Dior couture gown from the 1940s. And then she realises there's a lot of Christian Dior couture gowns hiding in these couple of wardrobes in this bedroom. And so she takes a photo of all of them and starts to wonder why her grandmother has those dresses in those wardrobes and why her grandmother has never told her about them. And that's what really kicks off the mystery behind it.
Exactly. So now we have two incredibly strong women. We have a secret, which, is an absolute must. Of course, the other part of the great storytelling, particularly with historical fiction, is we've got to have the love, okay? We've got to have romance. And I really like the way you wrote Skye's romance in particular. We all know as writers that you're supposed to chuck as many obstacles as possible in their way. I think you mastered it in this particular book, Natasha. So you had a lot of fun with the writing of the love stories. I could tell. Both of them were very dishy men. Let's talk a little bit about. Talk a little bit about the girls' loving. It is Mother's Day. Come on.
Exactly.
Give us something to fan our face over.
Yeah, it's quite funny. Writing. What I think one of the hardest things about writing a book sometimes when you have a love story in there is like how many different ways can you possibly come up with to keep two people who want to be together apart? And so, as a writer, that's quite challenging sometimes. So, creating that sense of drama is can be tricky, but also quite a lot of fun to play around with. So, Sky meets a boy called Nicholas when she's very young, when she's 10 years old in Cornwall, and she quickly becomes very close friends with Nicholas over her childhood from the time she's 10 until the time she's 14. They're the closest of friends. But Nicholas is American, and he has to go back to America. And they promise to write to each other, and Sky never receives a letter from Nicholas after he leaves England, which she finds quite distressing because he was one of the closest people in her life. But fast forward a number of years and she does meet Nicholas again in England. And Nicholas is working in the RAF, but once again, he's proving to be very difficult to pin down and quite mysterious. And there's something going on and she's just not sure what it is. And what that thing that's going on proves to be quite problematic in kind of rebuilding their friendship. And there's also the fact that Nicholas is engaged to another woman called Margot Jordan, which is also problematic for Sky.
Exactly. And the other thing I really liked about this, and I know you personally do not have any sisters, but I really, really like the way you wrote the relationship between Sky and her sister. It's quite a toxic relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a bit. I do quite like my villains. It's terrible, isn't it?
They're fun to write, that's why.
They are. And I do have a lot of fun writing Liberty because I do think the villains get the best lines sometimes. And Liberty definitely gets some of the best lines in this book. Margot gets a few good lines too, I've got to say. When I first started writing, like Liberty wasn't, like she was there, she was going to be a character, but I had no idea how integral she would be to the story until I began writing it, and she kept insistently popping up on the page and saying, I need to be here, I need to be in this scene, here's me again. Oh God. So she was kind of as annoying to me as she is to Sky in the book. So yeah, she definitely made her presence felt to both me and to Sky in the book. But I liked playing with their relationship because it is quite complicated, and I think lots of sibling relationships are very complicated. So it was nice to sort of play around with a villainous sister who is also someone I hope we grow to understand and respect by the end of the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know I'm not the first person to make this observation, but you're a pretty prolific writer. You've produced 7 books in 8-9 years, not to mention also becoming a mother 3 times over. Where do the ideas spring from, and do you end up with more ideas than you could possibly have time to write that many stories?
Look, I'm a bit of a one idea at a time kind of writer. I do hear of writers who have literally drawers full of ideas, and for them the struggle is to pick the best idea when they've got so many ideas competing for their attention, and I never have that. There's literally only ever one idea at a time for a book, which I guess is kind of good because it means that you don't have the distraction of other fresh ideas. But it's also quite hard because it means you've got to make that idea work. You don't have the luxury of being able to say, oh, well, I'll just write 20,000 words. If it doesn't work, I'll throw it in the bin and pick up this other idea. You've got to make that idea work. So whether that means that I'm more selective about choosing the ideas, I don't know what it is. But for me, it's always where the ideas come from. It's always in the research that I'm doing for another book. There'll always be one thing that I'll just go, oh, that's what I want to write about. And a million other people could read that same book and would just skip over that and it wouldn't kind of strike their attention. And I don't know what it is about. I always think there's some mysterious kind of force out there that makes your writerly brain connect to something in a way that it probably doesn't connect with other normal people's brains. And so as soon as I see that, I write it down, because I know that that's my one idea. I can't let it go. I can't try and remember it, because I never will. So I usually like to have that idea a good 6 months before I start writing anything, because I'm such a hopeless planner and I don't really know what I'm doing when I sit down to write. I like to have at least 6 months to think about it a bit, just in the back of my mind, so that I at least have a couple of scenes maybe going on when I do eventually sit down to write the book. So that's how it works for me. And luckily, fingers crossed, each idea has worked itself out, and I hope that continues.
Well, one way of avoiding writer's block, I always think, is to write. Since you came to StoryFest in 2019, your career has taken off like a juggernaut internationally. I was curious, A, how does that feel? And B, how does that change the rhythm of your writing, if at all?
It feels quite unbelievable, to be honest. You know, when the French photographer hit the New York Times bestseller list, my US editor emailed me to let me know. And in that email, she wrote, "Oh, so you can cross that off your bucket list now." And I wrote back to her and said it was never on my bucket list, because it was unimaginable to me that, you know, a writer from Perth in Australia would ever crack the New York Times bestseller list. So it felt like I had to go and look on the New York Times website and make sure my name really was there. And she had it kind of mocked up, this, you know, fake chart, and sent it through to me, because it just didn't seem real. And I think because, unfortunately, since my books have been out in the US, I haven't been over there. I haven't seen them. I haven't walked into a Barnes & Noble and seen my book on the shelf. And so it still feels removed and distant, but even though I get all the shelf from some readers and from my publishers, and like I know logically it's there, it just doesn't feel like it really is. So there's that sort of things where there's all that going on, and you're trying to imagine that it's real, and it still doesn't feel quite real.
But if The Paris Secret will be your third book going into the US market, surely this time you get a free check. Well, actually not in the current environment, but in theory, surely with the third successful, what will be successful book, you'll get to go this time, surely.
Well, I was planning to go this year, but I don't think that will happen anymore. So, you know, maybe next year, who knows? Who knows how long we'll have to not be able to travel internationally for. It could be a long time. So I'm not even thinking about that kind of thing at the moment. But yeah, in terms of how it changes things, I mean, it makes you so much busier. I don't know why I hadn't thought that, you know, putting out a book here in April and then putting out a book in the US in September, it's like having 2 books come out a year, even though it's the same book. You have to do all the work around the launch all over again, all the publicity, all the interviews, all the social media. You've got to copy, edit and proofread the book all over again, because obviously spellings and grammar gets Americanized, so you've got to go and check all of those things. So there's a whole lot of extra work that you suddenly hadn't planned on, and you suddenly have to do in what used to be, you know, my lovely, blissful, quiet writing time of the year, September, October, November. You know, it would be more than 6 months since the book would come out in Australia. I could just sit back and write with no distractions, and now it's like, oh no, massive distraction going on. So, like, I think last year I was like, oh my God, this is actually really exhausting, and I don't know that I can keep putting out a book every year with it going like this. So we're just going to kind of monitor that and see how it goes, because it's becoming more and more unachievable to keep up that kind of pace of publication when life is so busy, and even more now with all the different translations that are coming out, which is, I mean, I'm not complaining, obviously. It's amazing, it's wonderful, it's fabulous, and I'm really, really grateful and really, really lucky. But, you know, you have a book come out in Sweden and you do some publicity things for them and in Norway, and it's great to have the opportunity, but it's a lot of extra stuff that takes away from the writing. So you have to kind of weigh up and balance, well, how am I going to keep going with the writing in light of all these other things that now have to be done.
And well, I can't remember who said this, but somebody I know who's a writer said, and I'm obviously paraphrasing, that writing a novel is like sitting down to do the HSC English exam every single day, which I can relate to. I don't know about you, but it's, you know, insofar as that it's mentally draining, you know, it's a taxing thing to have to do. But it's also, as you well know, quite physically hard on the body to you know, the bum glue that's required to write a novel. Bum glue is definitely a Di Morrissey. How do you, I love, it's good, isn't it? Straight to the point. How do you nourish and support yourself, your creative inner self? And what do you do to support your creative inner self?
Yeah, you're right. It is physically, you know, sitting in a chair in front of a computer all day long typing is so bad for your body. And every writer I know has a sore back or a sore neck or constant headaches. And so, like, that's really important to get up and move. And so over the last 2 years particularly, I've become much more conscious of that because my back did start to seize up. I was like, oh my God, if I'm like this at my age, what am I going to be like when I'm 80? So that was a real wake-up call to get up out of the chair and get moving. And so I only write in half-an-hour blocks now, and I set a timer, because if I don't set a timer, I'll forget and I'll just get lost in what I'm doing. And as soon as the timer begins, I get up. And for 15 minutes, I'll go and make myself a cup of tea or just go and do something else. And I'm more productive like that anyway. I write much better in a half-an-hour block than if I just sit there for 2 hours, you know, fidgeting and being, you know, bored because I know I'm there for 2 hours, whereas half an hour feels super manageable. So for me, running is my thing that I find, it sounds strange, quite creatively fulfilling, because it's mindless, it's meditative. You know, you don't have to think about anything. So often my mind will just pick up on a scene or a character or a conversation, and it will start to invent as I'm running. And whole scenes very often unspool in my head while I'm out running. So then I get home, I do that first thing in the morning, then I get home and I know what I've got to write that day, because it's all kind of taking place in my head whilst I've been pounding the pavement. So that's quite lovely. And also creatively, I try to make sure that I incorporate as much other art forms into my life as I can. So my girls and I have a subscription to the West Australian Ballet, which we go to 4 times a year. I listen to fashion history podcasts because there's always little nuggets of research in there that are really quite helpful. You know, I'll often just pull out a book. I often just buy books, non-fiction on fashion or something like that, that I don't particularly need, but just might be nice and creatively inspiring, and I'll sit down and look at one of those. And this year I enrolled in a fashion illustration course, which I've been doing, and it's been quite nice actually over the last few weeks to have had that to do. So
and you're really good, can I just point out? I've been looking at your watercolors, and I just hate you because my dad was a really good watercolor. You can actually see one of his behind me, but I can't draw or paint or any of those things. I'm absolutely agreeing with Envy that you can. But your Instagram post, I sit there and go, wow, like is there any end to your talents? Now you can do a fashion illustration as well.
Oh no, look, I mean, up to a couple of months ago, I would have said I can't paint or draw either. I just think Carrie Hess, who is doing the course, is just a really good teacher. And I also think it helps when you're painting something you really love. Like, I really love the stuff that I'm painting. If I was painting, I don't know, bowls of fruit, I don't think they would turn out quite so well.
Well, you said you're not a foodie, so I guess, you know, I'll just take the fact that, okay, I'm a pretty good cook. So, and you said you hate cooking, so there we go. You can draw, I'll cook.
Terrible cook, yeah.
I'm also curious about, I know that when you were doing your Masters at Curtin, you were working under Liz Brisky, who's quite a famous Australian writer these days as well. It made me wonder, who are your literary mentors? Who has helped you gain the confidence to become the writer that you are today?
Definitely Rebecca Saunders, my publisher at Hachette. She is my number one. She's the person I've learnt more from than anyone in the writing universe. And every single book I learn more from her. She just has the most amazing eye. She can just read something and just ask you one question, the right question that you didn't know you needed to be asked. And for me, that will just make me go, oh my God, now I can see what I need to do with my book. And she's a great teacher because she doesn't come across like a teacher. You never know that she's teaching you, but you walk away having been taught so much, and I think that's definitely the sign of a great teacher. So she's amazing. I also, another friend of mine, Sarah Foster, who's a West Australian, who is also a writer. She writes sort of mystery suspense type books, and so not the same as what I write at all, but we always share our manuscripts, and she used to be an editor prior to becoming a writer, and she also is very insightful, and it's just taught me a lot about character. She's very good at that, and pace she's very good at as well, so she's taught me a lot about that kind of thing. And then I'm always reading, I always have a book on the go, and I learn something from every book that I write, even if I don't love the book. It's like, well, why didn't you love it? That can teach you as much as a book that you do love, and you dig into, okay, why did I love that? So, you know, all authors everywhere whose books that I read teach me stuff as well. So lots of inspiration and learning to be found out there in the world of books.
So I was also curious, because you started off writing literary fiction and you moved to historical fiction. Is it also because historical fiction allows you most readily to write about remarkable women? I mean, can you imagine yourself writing in a different, I mean, I know genre is kind of a publishing marketing thing rather than an author thing, but can you imagine saying, oh, right, I'm done with this now, I want to move in to tell a different kind of story about a different kind of remarkable woman? Is that something that you ever ponder, I suppose?
I don't think, not at this point. I love historical fiction. I mean, you know, who wouldn't love sitting at their desk every day and, you know, escaping off into the 1940s and the beautiful fashion and just, you know, this kind of different world and imagining a story taking place there. I really like that. So, like, I know some writers say they hate writing, but they love having written. I'm the kind of writer who loves the writing. Like, I really enjoy sitting at my desk and getting into my stories and just losing myself in that world. So, and the historical fiction is what attracts me again and again and again. So I don't think so. I think, you know, part of the reason I did kind of shift from literary to historical is, I mean, I wrote my first couple of books as literary fiction because I did my first as my master's degree, and you're kind of supposed to write that kind of book at uni. So I did, without really thinking about what I really wanted to write, which I've always loved reading historical. So it made sense kind of for me when I finally woke up to the fact that maybe I should write that if I loved reading it. And I had so much more fun with it. I enjoy it so much more. So until I stop enjoying it, I don't think I'll stop writing it. Yeah, so it's just, you know, there's nothing I'd rather do with my day. So I think if you get to spend your day doing the thing you most want to do, then why change anything?
Absolutely. And that segues quite nicely into the fact we all know what a prodigious output you have. So we know that you've already written a book for 2021. Would you want to tell us a little bit about that, so we can get a taster for what we can look forward to next autumn?
Sure. So the book for next year has a working title of The Riviera House. Don't know what it will actually be called when it gets out on shelf, because we often end up changing titles, so I'll keep you posted on title. It's a dual narrative, like The Paris Secret or The French Photographer. It's got a contemporary storyline and a historical storyline set during the war. The entire historical storyline takes place in France, and the entire contemporary storyline takes place in a little town on the French Riviera called Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, which is a beautiful little French town that I visited in the winter 2018-19, Northern Hemisphere winter, and just fell in love with it and was like, okay, this has got to be in my book. And, you know, again, going back to that point of, you know, why I write historical fiction, you know, when you get to spend your whole day writing about this beautiful French Riviera town, like, why would you want to do anything else? So I've loved writing that book. In that book, for some reason, the contemporary storyline, just, there's always a gift from the writing muse in every book, I find, and the two contemporary main characters, Remy and Adam, were my gift from the writing muse in the Riviera House, which was good because the historical storyline was so complex that if I hadn't have had a gift somewhere else, I might well have given up. So thank you, writing muse, for being on my side in one part of that book anyway. So yeah, so that's, I'm in the just finished the first structural edit for that, so probably got at least one more structural edit to do, and then that will be coming out sometime next year. Possibly not the same time as I normally have. We might move this one closer to Christmas. We're sort of playing
well,
around.
as you said, I mean, it's all getting a bit hard to juggle all the moving parts now. And like everyone else, you're an ISO. And what has the Lester clan been up to with everybody being at home, not being able to go to school? Oh, actually, I suppose they've been on holidays too. But what have you all been up to not kill each other and to pass the time in the most pleasant way possible?
Do you know, I mean, it's obviously a terrible time for everyone, but there's been some really nice things that have come out of it. We've really loved just not having to rush around to places on the weekend. The gift of an uninterrupted weekend is something I had never appreciated or thought of, because it had never happened before. What you don't have, you can't miss because you don't know it. But then when you suddenly have a weekend where you don't have to do anything except stay home with kids and play endless board games and make cupcakes and, do painting courses, and it's just been so lovely. And I think my kids, they were saying to me almost that they don't really want to go back to school because they've just enjoyed the time we've all been able to spend together so much. Not having to drive to netball and soccer and tennis and everywhere else that you have to go to. So we've survived quite well, I've got to say. And I'm actually going to really miss them when they go back to school. Even though, it's been hard to juggle that writing time, I will miss them. So it has been nice to just really connect together as a family over many, many, many games of Monopoly.
Well, you're a better woman than me. Monopoly just does my head in. So we're now on Mother's Day, where hopefully, I can smell a lovely standing rib roast going on in the background in my house. What are you hoping you get as a gift for Mother's Day? Because, of course, with the kids being off school, there has been no Mother's Day stall at school. So husbands, fathers, etc., have been called to arms to actually assist the small people with the gift purchasing. So what are you hoping you're going to get? Probably not fluffy slippers. So what are you hoping?
No, they asked me what I wanted, and I said, all I really want this year is a beautiful lunch with all my favourite delicious foods and you guys gathered around the table. And I don't think I've ever said that before, but this year I just thought, that would be really nice and really special, just to, have another beautiful family weekend together. So I can smell the scones cooking down the hall. My husband is the cooker and the baker in my family, not me, which is probably fortunate because at least Mother's Day lunch will be edible. So no gifts, just a beautiful family lunch, which will be beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being our guest. It's been a really fascinating conversation. I think we've both coped quite well in the virtual universe. I know everyone out there watching us will be applauding and saying thank you very much for being our virtual guest today, Natasha. I can feel everyone's good vibes all around us. My name is Meredith Jaffe, and on behalf of StoryFest, thank you for turning up today. Have a happy Mother's Day. Enjoy the rest of what you have left of your weekend. Don't forget, you can click on the link at the end of this recording to go to Harbour Bookshop and buy the books, or you can also click on a link to go to the StoryFest website if you would like to contribute as a show of thanks for this session. Natasha, thank you so much for being our guest today. I can't wait to read next year's book. I hope it's 10 times as wonderful as The Paris Secret.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Meredith. I really appreciate it. Like so many authors, anything we're able to do to help spread the word about our books at the moment is much, much appreciated. So thank you. And happy Mother's Day to everybody. I hope you all get the presents you want and the delicious lunch that you love. So thank you.